Okay, so we just want to look at writing trig equations. This is lesson 3-4. So this is n3-4. It cut off of my paper here, but hopefully you'll recognize it. And we're writing trig equations. Just a couple things from this particular thing. There's not a whole lot new here. Sinusoidal we talked about way back, but that's just means it's sine or cosine. They're both sinusoidal functions. Okay, so that's all the detail we need on that. We just need to know these are going to work for sine or cosine. Also, this is new. On the previous lesson when we talked about finding a from the graph, we just counted. Okay, so this is nice. We can find the max value, the min value, do some subtraction, and divide by 2, and we have it rather than having to count. All right, and then k, also we hadn't talked about that. Again, we did some counting, but we could find the max value, subtract the amplitude, which remember a is the absolute value of amplitude. Okay. So, and we could find our k value. All right, let's take a look at some graphs. All right, this first one, it says write the equation for each of the following graphs in terms of sine and cosine. So this one I'm going to let be my sine, and this one I'm going to let be my cosine. All right, so we know that we need an a value, a b value, a k, and an h for each graph. Okay, so I'm going to look a, b, h, and k. I need those values in order to write my equations. All right, now on the previous, it said the screen, and we had a is equal to the max minus the min divided by 2. Okay, so my maximum point, right, these are all the same height, that's at 1. So my max is 1. My minimum value is down here, that's -7. So minimum is -7. So if I use that little formula, that's 1 minus -7 divided by 2, which turns out to be 4. Now, for those of you who are not big on formulas, remember you can still count, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and a is half of that, right? So that's where we're getting the 4. And then k, they gave us that formula for k. K would be the maximum, so that's 1, minus the amplitude. The amplitude was 4. Okay, so 1 minus 4 would be -3. So my shift happens down here at -3. So I'm going to draw my shift line there. Okay, b is 2 pi divided by p. Okay, so I got to find out what p is. All right, so we usually count that. We start at a starting point for cosine and an ending point for cosine, or we could start at a beginning point for sine and go to an ending point of sine, which would be here, right? But so let's see what that would be. So for sine, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 units. And for cosine, that's a half, 1 1/2, 2 1/2, 3 1/2, 4 1/2, 5 1/2, 6 1/2, 7 1/2, 8 1/2, 9 1/2, 10. Okay, so p is going to be the same for both graphs, which a and k would be the same for either one. So, this isn't as hard as I thought it was going to be. So since p was 10 units, right, I'm just going to count it across here. The distance across here is 10, and our units we're counting by pi over 6. Okay, so I want to simplify that. 10 times pi divided by 6 is 5 pi over 3. Okay, so 2 pi divided by 5 pi over 3. Okay, so we could rewrite that. Let's take that kind of over to the side. So that'd be 2 pi times 3 over 5 pi. Pi's cancel. 2 times 3 is 6 over 5. So B is going to be 6 over 5. All right, let's see about h. Will h be the same no matter what? H was the distance from the y-axis. So if this was my starting point for cosine, then h, let me change colors here so it shows up a little better, then h is going to be the distance here, right? That's my h value for cosine. But if this is my starting point for sine, that is certainly not going to be the same. So h is going to be different for each one. So I'm going to put my sine h. Okay, I'll put that in quotes, right? The h for my sine function would be it would be 1 unit in length, so that's going to be pi over 6. And then my cosine h, right, is going to be from this point, which is a half a unit. All right. So one thing I do to make my life easier is I count, since it's a half a unit, I'm going to count all the halves. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's 7 halves, right? So that would be 7 halves pi over 6, because that's what my units are counting by, right? So that would be simply 7 pi over 12, okay, is my h value for cosine. So now I want to put that all together. Okay, so f of x is equal to 4 sine, b is 6 over 5, x, we went pi over 6, we went to the left, so that's plus pi over 6, and then k was minus 3. All right, so then cosine will also be 4 6/5 x plus, because again we went to the left to start this, and we went to the left 7 pi over 12. And then we also went down 3 for our k value. Okay, now one last thing we need to check on is direction, right? Because we could have positive 4 or negative 4. We know A is 4, but amplitude could be positive or negative. All right, so when I'm looking at sine, I know from sine normally started and went max, then back to 0. Since this one starts and goes minimum, I know that this would be a negative 4. Okay, cosine normally goes down, starts at the max and goes to its minimum, so this is positive 4 cosine. All right, now I would like to point out that there are other possible starting points. You could have said that this was your starting point, or here would be a starting point. The reason I did not use those is because those were further away from the y-axis, and I usually go to the one that's closest to the y-axis. But those would have been valid as well. They would have just, again, you would have had a change in your h value, and your amplitude would be different, because this one would have been a positive 4, and then also if we were starting down here for cosine, right, that would give us a negative 4 cosine. Okay, so you just need to decide on your starting point, and the easiest way to do that is pick the starting point closest to the y-axis. All right, let's take another example. All right, so again, I know A, B, and K will be the same no matter what. And then H I'll have to decide for sine versus cosine. So I'm going to have sine, and I'm going to have cosine. Okay. So let's start off by finding A. A was the maximum, which in this case is 5. Minimum, which is negative 1. Okay, so 5 minus negative 1 is 6. Divided by 2 gives us 3. So A is 3. Okay, B is the period, 2 pi divided by the period, so we need to find out what the period is. So I find it usually easiest to just start at the top of one wave and count my way over to the top of the next wave. Okay, so here we're counting by halves, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and my units are halves, so that means that P is 6. So B would be 2 pi divided by 6, or simply pi over 3. Okay, and we said K would be the maximum minus the amplitude, so we have 5, take away 3 would put us at 2. So my shift line here, right, is at 2. So K equals positive 2. Okay, so now that I've got my shift line drawn in, I want to figure out, well, where's my starting point? And I said the easiest thing to me is just pick the one closest. So as I'm going along here, this point and this point would be the closest starting points, one to the left, one to the right. And it turns out they're exactly the same distance away from the y-axis. So since I went to the left last time, I'm going to go to the right this time. All right, so from here to here is 1, 2, 3 halves, 3 half units, right? So that would be simply be 3 halves, and that's my h value, okay, for sine. This is my sine starting point. Okay, so now that I have a, b, k, and h for sine, I can put it together. Right? F of x equals 3 sine pi over 3 x, we went to the right, so that's minus pi, and I said that would be 3 over 2, and then plus 2 for my k value. Okay, so now I want to look at cosine. Okay, so switching back to red, cosine, again, this is equal distance, so I'm going to go to the right, and that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 half units, which means h is 3. Okay, so putting that together, f of x equals a, which is 3, cosine b pi over 3, x minus, because we went to the right, 3, and then plus 2. All right, last thing that I do is I check and see, is it going to be a negative 3 or a positive 3 for each one? Okay, so sine, we started here, went up, so that's positive. Cosine, we started here, all right, and went down, so that's positive. And I just realized I could have started here for cosine right on the y-axis, and that would have been no shift at all. Okay, so if I had started here, I'm going to write this down here just to say if this was my cosine starting point, g of x would have been negative 3, because it was going up, cosine pi over 3, and since there's no h shift at all there, that's just going to be x and then plus 2. Okay, so that was also a possibility. I missed that. So if you miss it, don't worry. I'll be prepared to check your answers.